Violations. A series of unexplained comas coincides with a group of visiting telepaths.
The Enterprise is transporting Ulians, telepathic historians who pull up forgotten memories.
They're demonstrating their abilities with Keiko. She's trying to remember a random teacup, and one of the Ulians is working with her to remember clues. He asks her questions about what she hears, sees, tastes, etc., and eventually she has total recall.
The head Ulian, Tarman, hits on Beverly and walks her off to further probe her about her first kiss.
And after they leave, one of the Ulians stays behind, and we immediately know who the villain of this episode is going to be, even though he hasn't said, done, or indicated in any way that he's the bad guy.
What a clumsy way to set things up. By the way, the Ulians have these gross-ass holes in the side of their heads that are very distracting.
Their clothes look like paper snowflake cutouts right before you unfold them.
Data and Geordi discuss the differences between human and android memories.
Data's wondering why humans forget events if they're so important, and Geordi has to explain how humans are different from robots.
They all sit down for dinner, and Tarman upsets his son Jev by trying to pressure everyone into having their memories read.
Everyone turns him down, while the same joke is made 2 or 3 times in succession.
And Tarman also brags about how much more skilled he is than Jev, which causes him to get up and leave.
Who, remember, we were told he is the bad guy already. Troy goes to talk to him and relates with her experiences with Luoxana.
She mentions that she can't read Ulians. What a surprise. And when she leaves him in the turbo lift, there is again ominous music, which again makes no sense for the scene.
Later, when Troy is getting ready for bed and using her space brush,
she starts having weird memory flashes of Riker.
He asks her about their relationship and subsequently sexually assaults her. And in the middle of it all, Riker is replaced by Jev.
And she ends up in sickbay in a coma.
Riker says the last person she talked to was Jev, and Picard wants to know if the Ulians would be open to an examination.
Riker questions Jev accusingly,
who is being shifty as f***.
And then he says,
Jev, I'm not accusing you of anything.
Riker goes to talk to Troy, and unfortunately reminds us that the episode Shades of Grey exists.
He tries to stimulate her brain by telling her about the most mundane, boring shit going on the ship, which causes her to fall even deeper into her coma.
When you wake up, we can talk about the personnel files.
Luckily, Beverly arrives to make him leave.
In his quarters, he starts to play some Tetris to get his mind off things.
And he starts having weird memory flashes of the ship malfunctioning and people being evacuated. So it could have been a flashback to any typical episode.
He has to leave an ensign behind, and like before, Jeff pops into the memory, and it causes Riker to fall into a coma too. And unfortunately, Dr. Pulaski isn't there to treat him with dumb flashbacks. Beverly has found a trace of electropathic residue. And you can tell by the way I said that, I took it very seriously.
She says it suggests Iracine syndrome,
which Worf does the favor of asking what the hell that is. And I'm sure Picard was thankful, because there's no way he knew what that was, even though he didn't say anything.
But she says that their condition isn't entirely consistent with that diagnosis. And Worf points out that this is coinciding with the transport of the Ulians, and wants to lock them up just in case. And Beverly points out that the electromagnetic changes she found were in the thalamus, which she says is related to memory function.
Yeah, I didn't think that was correct.
And for once, you seem to be right.
I have in my notes, ask Robert. They confront the Ulians, who are taken aback, but they say they'll cooperate.
And agree to be monitored while they do some more memory probing.
Since Keiko had a memory probe earlier, Beverly does some tests and loves how it gives her a chance to show off how many brain structures she knows. It felt like I was reading Jules Verne.
But she finds nothing unusual. Geordi questions the computer to try to find possible causes for the comas, and I actually really liked this scene.
I did too, and I was also happy that he addressed that the computer does not perform non-routine scans most of the time. Their ship runs into unknown stuff every week. Change the default settings on your freaking computer, you idiots.
Surprisingly, when characters act in a logical way and ask logical questions, the show is good.
Who would have thought?
Beverly then has an episode of her own where she sees a hairy, computerized Picard talking to her in a morgue.
She sees her husband Jack on the table, and of course Jev pops in, and she falls into a coma too.
Picard tells Data and Geordi to research the planets the Ulians have traveled to in the past to see if there were any similar comas there.
And they are notified that Troi has regained consciousness. She says all she can remember is using her space brush and then waking up from her coma.
And being afraid.
Well, when you brush your hair, sometimes it's scary. Picard gets her up to speed, and then goes to talk to the Ulians.
Jev offers to retrieve Troy's memories to prove their innocence, and Picard says he'll consider it.
Geordi and Data are still looking at planets the Ulians were at before, and they find some comas attributed to Erisine syndrome, but Geordi suggests that their doctors probably weren't as good as Beverly. That's when I knew this episode was full of shit.
Troi agrees to undergo a memory probe.
And it works, but when she gets to the violation part, Riker turns not into Jev, but Tarman, and we get a huge over-the-top music buildup.
Jev talks to Picard about possibly prosecuting Tarman for invading Troy's memories, but Picard says he's not sure if they have a legal standing.
When has that ever stopped them before?
And Tarman contends that he is innocent.
Geordi and Data are still searching and find more comas, but Tarman wasn't present at some of the incidents, and at this point I started to suspect that perhaps Jev was the bad guy.
Jev goes to talk to Troi, and at first he seems to apologize for his father's behavior, but as the scene goes on he gets really creepy, and he starts invading her memories, revealing that it was him behind everything all along. Troi busts out her incredible martial arts moves, and actually does a good job of knocking him around before others arrive.
Data tells her the results of their research when he could have saved everybody the trouble and used his freaking radio instead of waiting to tell them in person after she had already been assaulted.
Tarman talks to the others, including the now conscious Riker and Beverly.
He's apologetic and says his people will do everything they can to help them through the healing process.
He tries to delicately discuss the mental treatment for their mental rape, and Picard very magnanimously takes the opportunity to interrupt and give a very pompous and condescending speech about how we all have to avoid becoming rapists ourselves. How uplifting.
I feel bad laughing at that, but that's really funny.
Yeah.
I felt like I was watching the end of a He-Man episode.
That's a great comparison, yeah.
The seed of violence remains within each of us. We must recognize that, because that violence is capable of consuming each of us.
Trying to think of a good He-Man villain name for something like that.
Rapor.
No, something more clever. You know how they have like Too Bad? Triclops.
I don't know if I'd call that clever.
Violations. Overall,
This was yet another episode that was not bad, but not particularly good either, with a simple story stretched out to fill the runtime. It was unique in terms of subject matter, which I didn't expect for this show, but other than that, it didn't really stand out. The indications that we should suspect Jev were pretty stupid, just music and camera movements telling us to watch out for him instead of actual events happening in the story. I half expected that to be a red herring, which wouldn't have made any sense, but it wouldn't have been any less dumb. The memory probe scenes I thought went on for too long, and just felt like they were padding the episode some more. I did really like the way Geordi figured things out. He went about things in a logical way, which was refreshing, and it did remind me of him doing the same thing back in Identity Crisis. I wish characters would approach things in that way more often.
you mean intelligently?
Yeah, especially given that they have this computer with all this information that they can work from, and they usually kind of put that off until toward the end of the episode. The ending felt thrown together at the last minute, with Jev randomly outing himself to Troi for no reason, which didn't have to happen anyway because Data and Geordi had already figured out that it was him. Tarman talked a little bit about the recovery they would go through, but it felt glossed over, and we didn't even get Beverly and Riker really talking about how they feel after everything, which I thought was a little weird. And then Picard had that super out-of-place speech at the end, which was a great way to end the episode. Overall, I thought it was really weird and not terrible, despite some stupid little things, but surprisingly forgettable. I gave it a C-.
I gave it a C. There was some pretty heavy subject matter to cover in this episode, but New Ground and Hero Worship also hit some heavier stuff. This one would have been more compelling if we were not told before the opening credits that Jev was the bad guy. Having all the stuff with Tarman being full of himself, trying to compel people to have their minds probed, meant nothing to us as viewers, because Jev had the villain stamp on his forehead in the first 30 seconds. Some sort of actual mystery would have helped. I thought the memory flashes had some interesting effects, and we don't really see that kind of cinematography in this show, but they did go on a really long time. I also agree that it was stupid, having Jev out himself at the end. As far as he knew, he had gotten away with it, so what was the point of him physically going to Troy's room and saying, yo, it was me, and I'm going to do it again right now? I also had questions about the Julian library. So they help people recall memories to build this library, but are they the actual events, or just how a person remembers the events? Because there's a big difference between those two.
That's an interesting thing to think about, that they didn't really go into very much.
Yeah, I wish they had expanded on that a little bit. This episode had a lot of dumb decisions, but I'm glad I was able to get at least one Total Recall plug in there.